Hey there. Hey, I'm Mike Keaton, and we just want to say thank you for tuning in today, and we are glad that you are with us. I am here with Ken Adams, founder of Impact Ministries, lead pastor of Crossroads Church, and we're talking disciple making. And especially today is a very unique day because this is actually, Ken, the very first episode of the Disciple Making Church podcast. So we're making some changes here.
Yeah.
We're going to share those with you today. And really, we're going to talk all things disciple making. So welcome. We're glad you're with us today. Hopefully, you'll get some stuff here that'll help you in your worlds as well. So, Ken, tell us about what we're going to be doing today.
Yeah. So, Mike, this is not our first podcast or our first video for Impact Ministries and for disciple making, but today really is a change. It's going to be a shift in what we've been doing in a number of different ways, and really that's kind of what we want to do here in this first episode, is just kind of let everybody know about the changes and sort of tell them what's coming, why we're doing it, and really how you can have this coming to you on a regular basis. And you know what? Here's what I hope happens. I hope that this is even more helpful and more focused because of the changes that we're making. I also hope that people will actually subscribe and share this with other people that they know that are would like to have this resource as well, and like to have a place where they can truly find really all things related to disciple making in the local church, in a disciple-making church. And that's part of the reason that we are making some changes and actually expanding this to lots of different platforms. So, the interesting thing is that, I actually just wrote a blog, and in that blog I made the comment that in a lot of ways the world does not need another podcast. The truth is that we've got podcasts galore, and there's a lot of church leadership podcasts. There's lots of, there are some, not lots, but some discipleship podcasts. But I did a search. I did a search on how many podcasts exist that deal with the subject of a disciple-making church. And you would be surprised that there are slim pickings. Interesting. They are far and few between. They really are.
Wow.
And your own personal experience probably echoes that as well, right?
It's the truth. And, that's the thing that I have always loved, really, about, to be honest, UCAN and Crossroads and just Impact and all the things that we're trying to do, is because I've always viewed you as a practitioner. You're not just a guy out there telling everybody the theory of everything.
Right.
We're in the trench of trying to flesh all these things out in a church context.
That's right.
And so it's not just disciple making, here's the methods of Jesus. It's like, okay, here's how you lead it in a church context. And so you're exactly right. So it's so needed.
Yeah, it really is needed. And so also, it's not only needed, but it also fits a certain niche, right? And so quite honestly, this is really for people who are saying we want to become, and we want to know what it means to be a disciple-making church, which is not, and we say this a lot around here, which is not the same thing as a church with discipleship.
Right.
Because a lot of churches have discipleship, but are not necessarily a disciple-making church.
Right.
Basically, the difference there is.
I was going to ask you, what do you want to explain that a little bit?
So discipleship, a lot of times, is really sort of an add-on ministry that churches have for people who want to maybe go deeper or master spiritual disciplines in their life, or they just want to grow in, really just Christian education. So what we define as a disciple-making church is actually the same thing that Jesus came to do 2,000 years ago, and that is really from beginning to end. That is all that we do, is that we exist to help people go from being untrained seekers to becoming fully trained disciples. And what I love about that is that is exactly the same thing that Jesus did. Jesus started a movement that became the church, which was helping people go from being far from God and not have a clue what it means to live the life Christ wants you to live, to becoming a fully trained follower of Jesus. And so that is actually what makes this podcast different, and that is really the number one reason why we're doing this, is because there really is a need for a disciple-making church podcast. We have done a lot of Facebook Live and some other video podcasts in the past that have talked a lot about disciple making, but not necessarily in every aspect of the church. And that's what's going to be different about this sort of this change. The setting isn't a lot different. The format isn't a lot different. But the focus will be different. And I really believe it's going to be a podcast that a lot of people are going to want to be a part of, going to want to learn from, and want to have it coming to them regularly. You know, when I started as a pastor 33 years ago now, as a senior pastor of a church planner, is, you know, I learned a lot from, you know, seminary classes and books and things like that. But I will tell you, probably one of the things that I benefited the most from was getting opportunities to go and sit down at a lunch table or sit in somebody's office and to hear from somebody else's practical experiences that was a little bit farther and further down the road than I was.
Right.
And as far as I was concerned, Mike, that was invaluable to me. And not because we were trying to copy what anybody else was doing or trying to replicate what anybody else was doing, but simply because you learn so much from other people's successes and their mistakes.
For sure.
And it is so hard. I mean, you can't, in my opinion, you can't put a price tag on being able to learn from other pastors and church leaders on how you move the ball forward, move the ball down the field on the mission. And so as a young pastor starting out, man, I used to take advantage of those opportunities every time I could get them. Mm-hmm. Well, a lot's changed in 33 years, and one of those things is the accessibility through different social media platforms. And you know, when I started pastoring 33 years ago, you couldn't click on a YouTube channel. You could go to a website, but they didn't have these kinds of videos available. You couldn't go to Facebook or, you know, Instagram or something like that if you didn't have a personal appointment with somebody, and sometimes that was hard to get to. So this new podcast gives us the opportunity to come alongside lots of other leaders that are really trying to figure out, how do I help my church to become a disciple-making church in really such an easy to connect with platform. Right. And so literally, you know, this has kind of been birthed out of honestly one of the things that has been a part of the way I've led our church for the last 33 years, and still to this day, I'm trying to learn from other models and trying to learn from other practitioners, as you said.
Yeah, it's something I still like to do, even just to meet with other leaders from other churches, you know, because we're all in this together, and we can learn from each other. And as we try to learn and share those learnings with each other. And I think one of the things you said that I'm actually excited about with this new podcast is the fact that we're going to kind of hear from things from all aspects of the church. Yes. You know, and so we'll have different people on the podcast that will you know, share from their, you know, part of the world, so to speak, church world, and just what it looks like in their world. That'll definitely resonate and connect to those who are tuning in. Yeah. So that's going to be a great resource.
Well, so one of the things that we will be committed to as we do this, as we move forward, is that it's going to be a nuts and bolts kind of podcast. Yeah, it really is. Yeah. And so there will be some philosophy of disciple making, some theology behind it, but for the most part, this is going to be a podcast that literally says, here's how we do it, and here's what we've learned, and here's how how we see it happening in a real time, real life situation. For an example, just this morning, you and I were a part of a disciple making environment in our church for men, and so a lot of times people are trying to figure out how do I integrate men's ministry in a church with a disciple making church focus and process and priority. And so we have an opportunity as we move forward in this coming year to talk through how we integrate the disciple making church into men's ministry, how it looks in our church. And I mean, we had probably 70 something men, maybe as many as 80 men in an environment for discipleship just a few hours ago.
Right.
So it is going to be very much a nuts and bolts type of thing, but it won't just stop there. We will talk about how does outreach. You know, a lot of times people miss this idea that that when you have a disciple-making church model, so outreach is a part of the process of making disciples. Worship. So a lot of times people would think, well, worship is just sort of a separate thing that you do on the weekends. You know what? Absolutely not. You know, that is a very strategic part. And so what we do in a weekend setting and in a worship setting is a part of a whole. And the whole is to make fully trained disciples, and worship is one part of that process. Children's ministry would be another. Another would be student ministry. Now, here's what I do know. After 33 years of experience, it is very, very hard to find resources on disciple making and how it relates to children, how it relates to students, how it relates to your budgeting process. So when we say all things disciple making, that really is what we mean. We're talking about outreach, we're talking about community impact, we're talking about missions, we're talking about women's ministry, we're talking about administrative, we're talking about graphics. Literally what I'm excited the most about this podcast is that we're gonna cover as many different aspects of church world and church life and how that relates to disciple making church. So we will have a lot of different guests on this podcast, but primarily from our church. Primarily different staff people from our church, because as you said, they are the ones that are in the trenches, and they are the ones that are literally hammering this stuff out. And so it'll be nuts and bolts. And you know, I heard somebody say years ago that until you've done something for at least 25 years, you really don't have any right to say anything, you know. And you know, there's an awful lot of truth to that, because one of the things you can't substitute for is time. Is time.
Experience, right?
Yeah. And so probably the biggest benefit to checking out and subscribing to this podcast is month in and month out. Here's what we're going to give you. We're going to give you a perspective on disciple making from 3 decades of experience. And we could probably tell you more about what not to do than we can about what to do. And so man, it's what we are passionate about. It's what we love doing. Quite honestly, it's something that we feel we are called to do. And really and truly, we have not arrived. We have not figured it out. But we are at a point where we are so willing to share with other churches the things that we have learned over the last 33 years. So in a lot of ways, it's not just giving back. It's really a matter of stewardship. It's really a matter of, really looking at the bigger picture of the kingdom and not just our own individual church. And so those are the things that are really driving what we're doing here. They're driving the change that we're trying to make. And so So we really are excited about just diving into and covering a whole array of topics that relate to a disciple-making church. I do believe it's going to be I do believe it's going to be at least not the only resource, but it's going to be one of the resources that you're going to want to have in your disciple-making tool belt.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's a valuable resource.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be greatly valuable to everyone who tunes in.
Yep.
Because it's coming from the practice.
Yep.
It's coming from the day-to-day grind of how do we flesh this out
Exactly.
in a local church context.
Yeah, and today is in many ways really just us kind of rebooting. It's kind of just really today is more of an announcement than it is a lot of information, and so today is an opportunity for us to say, here's what to look forward to, and here's why you want to share this and get the word out, because we know there's a lot of churches that need to have this resource, which is also one of the reasons why we're making another change in how this is distributed. So for a long time, some of the video training that we've done or the video conversations that we've had were either you had to find our website or they were on Facebook Live. Mm-hmm. And so if you didn't happen to catch it, through Facebook and, who knows, when you're going to see it, when you're not going to see it, and all those algorithms and all that kind of stuff of whether or not even shows up in your feed, right?
Exactly.
So this is one of those things that we believe people are going to want to subscribe to. Mm-hmm. And so what we'll do here is this will be distributed a little bit differently, and all the different ways are below here on the screen, but Apple Podcast will be one of the ways to do that. It will still be on Facebook Live. It will be on your YouTube channel. So go ahead and subscribe to YouTube, and then it'll also be on our website. So if you go to the Apple Podcast or the YouTube, so what'll happen is that you don't have to just catch it when we're doing it, or luckily find it on Facebook. It's going to just drop every month. It's going to drop into your inbox or your go-to source, for training. So I think it's going to be one of those types of resources that you're going to want to look at every month. We'll do it on a monthly basis because, quite honestly, time is our most valuable commodity, and you don't have time to look at every single thing that comes into your inbox or your email or whatever. But this is going to be one of those things that I think you're going to want to say, hey, I want to hear this content on a regular basis.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And our listeners are going to also gain a whole bunch of stuff from all the different angles we're going to present this material. But I would also think it's probably a good thing just to throw it out there that, hey, if there was something they wanted to hear, right, they could let us know that too. They could reach out to us and say, how do you guys do this even?
Yeah.
And, we could organize that into a podcast down the road somewhere. So, we'll definitely do what we can to,
absolutely,
not to say that, hey, this is how we do it and this is how you need to do it and we got it all figured out, but we could share some of our learnings.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah,
that'd be really good.
For sure.
And so also too, you can always go to our website and connect with us and let us know more. ImpactDisciples.com is how you reach us, ImpactDisciples.com. And I think that link is on here as well. And you're going to want to check that out. Go to our website. But also, Mike, some of the things that can almost speed up the process, or I would just say as many things as we're going to talk about, sometimes you just need to start with the basic idea of what does that mean to be a disciple-making church, and how do we get there? And so there's a few things that are not new that we've been doing for a really long time that people can still take advantage of. It almost just kind of ramps you up to where this podcast will be even more helpful if you have laid a foundation for disciple-making church. So we have a seminar that you can have at your church. You can host at your church. A lot of times we do that on a Saturday. but it doesn't have to be a Saturday. We can do it at any day that works, and it's about a 4-hour. It's 4 sessions, so depending on how you lay it out, the time changes. But we actually can come into your church, walk you through the components and the elements of what it means to be a disciple-making church. Come right out of the life of Christ. The other possibility is for pastors. Pastors might want to take advantage of what we call a online equipping group,
right.
And we are starting brand new disciple-making pastor equipping groups all the time. And so we had just recently kicked a new one off, so we'll have another one coming up here later on in the fall. But go ahead and get your name on the list so that you can take advantage of that. You know, the funny thing is, Mike, is that we have a mission to make disciples being led by a lot of pastors who have never been discipled. And there's just a lot wrong with that. There's a lot backwards with that. So the disciple making seminar, the online
equipping group
for disciple making pastors, and then also a great opportunity that we're rolling out here as we go into this fall season is a disciple making church consultation process,
right.
Which we will actually come in and work with a individual church to get really a map, a ministry action plan that is uniquely designed for your church to help you figure out how do we transition from a church that is not making disciples, a non-disciple making church, to a disciple making church. And so we will come in, and a number of us will be leading these, but we will come in and really walk you through a process.
That's right.
It could be invaluable for a church
Absolutely.
to do that. And then the last thing that I would share is that we do have a little resource that just came out recently called the First 30 Days to a Disciple-Making Church. And so it'll be on your screen as well. And this is a great resource for a church staff or leadership team or small group leaders to go through. It's a primer, actually. It's just a primer for starting the process of becoming a disciple-making church.
It's a great resource.
Yeah, so we got all 3 of those, all four of those opportunities available for you.
Right. And I would just want to just encourage the equipping groups for the pastors and so forth, because it just makes a huge difference if you get your leadership, going in that direction. And also just to say too that you don't have to be the lead pastor to do that. There's plenty of churches that have discipleship pastors or even some volunteer leaders and that sort of thing that we can connect with you as well. I mean, because we're all just,
Yeah. Well, Mike, I would like to just sort of switch roles here for a minute and just ask you, you're asking a lot of the questions, but I know that from your own personal experience, you've been in ministry for a long time. You've been in churches that were focused on being disciple-making churches and churches that are not. And so just right off the top of your head, man, what has been really the deciding factor for you that this is the way church ought to be done, and what does it mean to you to be leading a disciple-making church?
So I think it's everything. I think I just go back to, really, and you've heard me say this before, I'm sure, but to me, Ken, it's about the mission. I was, the Lord just opened my heart and mind to what the mission of the church is, years ago. And as a young guy in ministry at that time, I was doing my best to flesh that out, but I didn't really have the tools in my hands. I had the big idea, and I knew that that's what we needed to be doing, but the specific how-tos, and I just didn't have that. And then God just crossed my path with you and Impact and just these other things. And when I became aware that Jesus actually had a strategy, I was like, wow, it opened up a whole new world for me.
Yeah.
And, I just never had heard that before.
Yeah.
And then when you start beginning to think that way and think that, discipleship, the difference between discipleship and disciple making and its process, not necessarily program first, then it just has changed everything for me. And so to be in a context where that is the thrust, that is the focus, it really is. It means everything to me.
Yeah.
And that's where I want to be.
Yeah.
To be able to make that kind of difference in that world. So my heart goes out to those that are kind of in those experiences, that maybe they understand that disciple making is the mission of the church, but it's just like, okay, what do I do now? And what's Jesus' strategy, and how do I flesh that out in student ministry or somewhere else, So, because it's not just for big church, it's not just for the adults, it's for really to sink the entire church.
Yeah.
That's why this podcast is so valuable, because it's a disciple making church from kids all the way to the oldest adults, and just lining everybody up going in that direction. To me, that's where it just gets, that's the sweet spot.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So.
Yeah, and I was just sitting here as I was listening to him thinking, so this podcast really it's just for guys like you and guys like me that are really trying our best to give leadership to the local church in the way that honors Jesus the most, and it does what Jesus has called us to do, which clearly Matthew 28:19-20 tells us to go and make disciples of all nations. And so a lot of guys are bought into that. They just don't know how.
Right.
And this is the how-to.
Yeah.
That's what this is.
It's like you said, the nuts and bolts. And so it's going to be a great podcast.
Yeah.
Looking so forward to just being able to be a part of it and just what God's going to do through it.
I remember when I was just starting out, probably about 2 years into a church plant, I got the opportunity to be a part of a seminar called Growing a Healthy Church. And that Growing a Healthy Church seminar is where I began to hear terminology that I had been practicing, but I didn't know how to say some of it, and I didn't really know how it connected to the life of Christ. And what was so good for me is that when I heard that as a young pastor, probably 30 years old, when I heard that, is that it was so freeing for me. It just freed me up from being able to say, I don't have to go figure it all out.
That's right.
All I have to do is just to keep looking at Jesus and look at how Jesus lived and how Jesus led and how Jesus started a movement of multiplying disciples, and just keep going back to that. And that has been the single most freeing thing that has happened to me in ministry for over 33 years. And the reason we're doing this podcast is because I really want as many pastors as possible to have the exact same freedom that I felt 30-something years ago.
That's amazing, man. That's fantastic. And that sounds like something the Lord would honor for sure. Well, we're so glad that you've joined us today at the new Disciple Making Church podcast. And we look forward to meeting again and just what God's going to do and how He's going to teach us all. So, anything else, Ken?
It's going to be great, man. Looking forward to a good year.
Good. Thank you, guys. Be sure to check out all the links below and give us a follow there, and check all those things out, and check us out at impactdisciples.com.